It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind that usually passed quietly in the small town where Mrs. Evelyn Carter lived. She had always preferred the calm, predictable rhythm of her days, and today was no different. At least that's what she thought when she decided to step out. Evelyn was a woman in her late 70s, though she carried herself with a dignity and energy that made her appear far younger than her years. Her hair, silver but neatly styled, shimmered slightly in the sunlight, and her posture was straight, almost commanding attention without her even trying. Despite her age, Evelyn had never let life slow her down. She walked with purpose, moving steadily through the familiar streets toward the local gun store she had been visiting for years. She had a reason for her visit today. The neighborhood she had called home for decades had changed in ways that worried her. Safety, something she had always taken for granted, was no longer certain. A few recent incidents in the area had reminded her that it was wise to be prepared, and she had made the decision to purchase a firearm for personal protection. It wasn't a whimsical choice. It was practical, and Evelyn had done her homework. She knew about firearms, safety, and responsibility. She wasn't someone who would ever buy a gun impulsively or without understanding it fully. The gun store itself was a modest, well-kept place, tucked between a small bakery and a hardware shop. The bell above the door jingled softly as she entered, announcing her presence to the few people inside. There were a couple of regular customers browsing quietly, glancing at rifles and handguns displayed behind glass counters, and a young clerk who seemed a little distracted by the smartphone in his hand. The smell of polished wood and gun oil filled the air, a familiar scent that Evelyn found oddly comforting. She had been coming here on and off for years, enough to recognize the layout of the store and the people who worked there. As she moved toward the section she knew held the kind of firearm she wanted, Evelyn's sharp eyes noticed a group of younger men near the counter. They were loud, laughing among themselves, carrying an energy that was both confident and slightly careless. They hadn't noticed her yet, which was fine. Evelyn preferred to observe before interacting. She wasn't one to rush into confrontations unnecessarily, but she could sense their eyes flicking in her direction, curiosity mixed with a hint of amusement. The first moment that made her pause, however, came in the form of subtle whispers she couldn't help but overhear. The men exchanged glances, smirks forming on their faces, and one muttered something under his breath about old ladies in a gun store. It was quiet enough that most people might not have noticed, but Evelyn was attentive. Years of experience had honed her awareness, not just in handling firearms but in reading people, understanding tones, and detecting the slightest disrespect. She didn't react immediately. Instead, she allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile, the kind that hinted she had caught on but wasn't about to confront them yet. Evelyn's mind wandered briefly to the irony of the situation. Here she was, a woman who had lived a full, independent life, entering a place she knew well, only to be silently judged because of her age. It wasn't the first time she had experienced such reactions, but there was a difference between casual observation and the dismissive attitude she sensed from these young men. Most people who underestimated her didn't realize that beneath her calm exterior lay years of wisdom, confidence, and a keen understanding of the world around her. She continued walking, her movements steady and deliberate. Each step echoed softly on the polished floor, a reminder that she was present and aware, not someone to be brushed aside or overlooked. Evelyn approached the display of handguns she had come for, her eyes scanning the models she had researched online, comparing features and prices. She examined one with practiced hands, testing its weight and grip as if she were having a silent conversation with the weapon. In her mind, she was preparing for the purchase not just as a necessity but as an affirmation of her independence. Meanwhile, the group of young men, still whispering and chuckling, finally noticed her fully. Some of them raised eyebrows, exchanged glances, and laughed softly, thinking they had found amusement in the idea of a woman her age handling firearms. Evelyn sensed the shift in energy around her, but remained focused, letting their whispers and stares wash over her like background noise. She had learned long ago that patience and composure were often more powerful than immediate confrontation. As she considered her options, she also reminded herself of her mission. She was there to leave empowered, prepared, and confident, not to engage in childish mockery. With that mindset, Evelyn carefully selected a few models to discuss with the clerk, ready to demonstrate that age was no measure of capability. Today, she was going to assert herself quietly, with dignity, and let her actions speak louder than any words. And so, the ordinary afternoon began to shift into something more significant. An encounter that would test not only Evelyn's patience but also the assumptions and biases of those around her. Though she didn't yet know it, the events about to unfold in the store would serve as a lesson for everyone present. Respect and experience are not dictated by age, and true confidence is shown through calm, measured action, not loud words or bravado. As Evelyn continued to browse the firearms, she became more aware of the small group of younger men who had been whispering and watching her since she entered. Their amusement was no longer subtle. It had grown into a quiet confidence, the kind that often comes from thinking someone else is weaker or incapable. Evelyn could feel their eyes on her as she examined a pistol, testing its weight and grip with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. She noticed the smirks, the little nods exchanged between them, and the soft chuckles that seemed to follow her movements. One of the young men, the tallest of the group, finally decided to speak. He didn't shout, but his voice carried enough for Evelyn to hear clearly. "You sure you know what you're doing, ma'am?" he asked, half mocking, half joking, leaning casually against the counter. The words were polite enough on the surface, but the tone was dripping with condescension. Evelyn glanced at him, her eyes calm but steady, and gave a small, polite nod. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she continued handling the gun, examining its features, and checking its weight. Her silence was deliberate, a way of showing that she was neither intimidated nor desperate to prove herself to people who clearly underestimated her. The young man's friends laughed quietly, thinking her silence meant she was unsure or nervous. They were wrong. Evelyn had spent a lifetime reading people, understanding their intentions, and recognizing when someone was trying to provoke her. She understood that their laughter was less about the gun or her abilities and more about their own insecurity and need to assert dominance. Despite the teasing, she refused to rise to their bait. She remained calm, composed, and dignified. One of the men stepped closer, pointing at the gun she was holding. "You're really gonna carry that?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "Looks kinda heavy for someone your age." The unspoken message was clear. He assumed she was too old to handle firearms responsibly. Evelyn's fingers tightened slightly around the grip, a subtle reminder that she was not just anyone who could be dismissed easily. She looked at him, her gaze firm, and smiled politely, as if to say, "I see you, but your opinion doesn't matter to me." The clerk, a young man distracted by his phone at first, noticed the interaction and hesitated. He seemed unsure of whether to intervene or join in. After a moment, he made a sarcastic comment under his breath, asking if she needed help reading the instructions for the gun. Evelyn heard it, but she didn't react with anger. She simply set the firearm down carefully, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. It was clear to anyone watching that she was not intimidated by their mockery. Her calm demeanor and measured actions spoke louder than any words could. Evelyn's mind wandered briefly, thinking about how often she had encountered similar situations. Age often comes with assumptions. People automatically believe that because someone is older, they are weaker, slower, or less capable. Evelyn had learned over the years to handle such assumptions with patience. She had faced people who underestimated her in many areas of life, and she had always found ways to quietly demonstrate her strength and competence. This situation was no different. The store, with its polished floors and neatly arranged firearms, was just the stage for another lesson in respect. Deciding to take control of the moment, Evelyn addressed the young men directly, though her voice remained calm and composed. "I've handled firearms responsibly for many years," she said softly but firmly. "I know how to use this safely, and I'm capable of making my own decisions." Her tone carried quiet authority, the kind that doesn't shout but still demands attention. The young men froze for a moment, caught off guard by her confidence. They had expected hesitation, uncertainty, or perhaps embarrassment. Instead, they were met with clear, measured assurance. Despite her calm approach, the tension in the store began to grow. Other customers glanced up from their browsing, sensing that something unusual was happening. Evelyn's calmness contrasted sharply with the young men's nervous energy. Their confidence, which had seemed so certain a few moments ago, wavered slightly as they realized that she was not the frail, inexperienced woman they had assumed. They had underestimated her, and the realization was uncomfortable. Evelyn continued her browsing, letting the young men observe her without interrupting. She handled each gun with care, explaining technical details to herself quietly as she inspected them. The young men, realizing that mockery was no longer entertaining, began to glance at each other uncertainly. The clerk, seeing that the situation was escalating beyond a simple joke, stepped back and stopped making sarcastic remarks. The air in the store had shifted. Evelyn had silently claimed her space, and it was now clear that she would not be dismissed or treated lightly. Even as the whispers died down, Evelyn's awareness did not fade. She knew that patience was still essential. The next few minutes would decide how far the mockery could go, and she was determined not to let it escalate further. Her calm, confident presence alone was already beginning to correct the assumptions of those around her. The young men, sensing that she was no ordinary customer, started to lower their voices and rethink their behavior. Evelyn had turned what could have been a humiliating situation into an assertion of dignity and quiet authority. By the time she reached the display case she had been eyeing, Evelyn had already made her point. She didn't need to shout or make a scene. Her composure, knowledge, and quiet confidence had spoken for her. The young men were still watching, but their laughter had faded into uncomfortable silence. Evelyn had shown, without raising her voice, that age was no measure of capability, and that respect was earned through action and presence, not assumed superiority. The laughter and whispers that had been quiet at first now grew louder. The young men, feeling encouraged by each other, started openly mocking Evelyn. They moved closer to her, leaning over the display case, and their voices carried enough for everyone in the store to hear. "Are you sure you should even be touching that?" one of them said with a smirk. "It's kind of heavy, don't you think?" Another laughed and added, "Maybe you need someone to help you read the instructions, ma'am." Their comments were no longer subtle. They were mocking, disrespectful, and designed to provoke a reaction. Evelyn felt a flicker of irritation, but she kept her expression calm. She had faced people underestimating her many times before, and she knew that losing her cool would only give them the satisfaction they were seeking. Instead, she took a deep breath and focused on what she had come for, choosing the right firearm for her safety. Each movement she made was deliberate and precise. She picked up a gun, felt its weight in her hands, and examined it carefully as though silently saying, "I know what I am doing." The young men were clearly frustrated that she didn't react the way they expected. Their whispers turned into louder jokes, their smirks harder to hide. "Maybe we should call someone to help her," one said sarcastically, trying to draw more attention from the few other customers in the store. Another added, "Or maybe she should stick to shopping for knitting needles instead of guns." It was clear they were underestimating her based solely on her age. Evelyn could feel the tension rising. This wasn't just about a few jokes, it was about assumptions, disrespect, and the arrogance of thinking someone older couldn't handle themselves. She had two choices: react angrily or respond with calm authority. She chose the latter. Setting the firearm down carefully, she straightened her posture, lifted her chin slightly, and looked directly at the young men. Her eyes were steady, her gaze unflinching. Without raising her voice, she said, "I have years of experience with firearms. I know how to handle them safely, and I am perfectly capable of making my own decisions." Her voice was calm but carried quiet authority. The words were simple but they had weight. The young men blinked in surprise. They had expected a shaky, uncertain response or perhaps an embarrassed retreat. Instead, they were met with someone who was confident, experienced, and unafraid. Evelyn's demeanor made it clear that she was not intimidated, that their attempts to belittle her would not work. One of the young men, now visibly frustrated, tried to challenge her further. "Yeah, but do you even know how to fire that properly?" he said, leaning a little closer. Evelyn picked up the gun again, holding it naturally in her hands. She demonstrated a few simple handling techniques, not to show off but to make a point. Her movements were precise, deliberate, and calm. She explained the safety features quietly to herself, but loud enough for the young men to notice. Their smirks faded slightly as they realized she was not only knowledgeable but also confident in her abilities. The clerk, who had been making sarcastic comments earlier, stopped speaking. He watched quietly, realizing that the situation had shifted. Evelyn was no longer the target of harmless fun. She was now commanding the room simply through her presence and knowledge. The other customers glanced over curiously, sensing the tension but also admiring Evelyn's composure. She had taken control of the situation without raising her voice or causing a scene. Despite the small victory, Evelyn remained aware that she needed to maintain patience. The young men were still there, still skeptical, and their pride wouldn't allow them to apologize easily. She decided to continue browsing, demonstrating her confidence through quiet action rather than confrontation. Each time she picked up a firearm, checked its weight, or examined its features, she reinforced the reality that age was no measure of capability. Evelyn also noticed that their jokes, once meant to humiliate, were starting to sound hollow. The confidence they had displayed initially began to falter as they realized that their target was unshaken. One of them whispered to another, probably questioning their own behavior, while the rest exchanged awkward glances. Evelyn didn't need to do anything further. Her presence alone was enough to make them reconsider their assumptions. The small crowd in the store now watched silently. Evelyn's quiet strength and calm authority had shifted the energy. The young men, who had entered the situation thinking they were superior, were now unsure of how to respond. They realized that mockery could not overpower experience, dignity, or confidence. Evelyn, meanwhile, stayed focused on her goal. She was there to purchase a firearm, not to engage in petty arguments. Yet, in the process, she was teaching an unspoken lesson about respect and the dangers of underestimating others based on age. By the time Evelyn moved toward the counter to ask about a specific model, the tension had shifted entirely. The young men were quieter now, their laughter gone, replaced by awkward silence. Evelyn's calm confidence had won the first round without a single raised voice or dramatic confrontation. She had shown that composure, knowledge, and quiet authority could outweigh ridicule and disrespect. The situation, which had started as mockery, was now an example of patience, dignity, and the quiet power of standing one's ground. Though she did not yet realize it, the next moments in the store would take the situation even further. What had started as casual ridicule would soon escalate, and Evelyn's patience, experience, and quiet strength would be tested even more. But for now, she had already made a significant impact. She had reminded everyone present that underestimating someone because of age was a mistake, and that true confidence comes from knowledge, composure, and self-respect. By now, it was clear that Evelyn would not be intimidated by the group of young men. Their mockery had grown louder, but it only made her more determined to stand her ground. She had come to the store with a purpose, to buy a firearm for her safety, and she wasn't going to let their disrespect get in her way. But this time, she decided that silence and quiet confidence were not enough. She needed to assert herself in a way that left no doubt about her experience and capability. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn straightened her back and moved a little closer to the group. Her movements were calm and deliberate, exuding authority without a hint of aggression. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone commanded attention. The young men, sensing a shift in energy, paused for a moment, confused by her sudden assertiveness. Evelyn looked directly at them, her eyes steady and unwavering, and spoke in a clear, firm tone. "I have handled firearms responsibly for many years," she said. "I understand safety, proper handling, and the rules. I am capable of using this gun correctly." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. The young men had expected uncertainty, perhaps even fear, but instead they were met with calm authority. Evelyn's tone left no room for argument. Her knowledge and confidence were evident, and the group began to realize that mocking her was not only disrespectful but also completely misguided. Their smirks faltered, replaced by hesitant glances at one another, unsure of how to respond to someone who was clearly in control. One of the young men, trying to salvage his pride, leaned closer and said, "Yeah, but have you ever fired one before? It's not exactly easy." Evelyn didn't flinch. She picked up the gun she had been examining, holding it naturally and with precision. With slow, deliberate movements, she demonstrated how to check the safety, hold the firearm, and aim correctly. She didn't speak as she did this. Her actions alone communicated what words could not. The young men watched in silence, their earlier arrogance replaced by a mixture of surprise and unease. Evelyn then spoke again, her voice calm but firm. "Experience doesn't come from age or size," she said. "It comes from practice, knowledge, and responsibility. I am confident in my abilities, and I expect to be treated with respect." The simplicity of her statement, combined with her composed demeanor, hit harder than any argument. The young men had been trying to assert superiority through ridicule, but Evelyn's quiet confidence made them feel exposed and unsure. The clerk, who had been making sarcastic comments earlier, now seemed uneasy. He realized that Evelyn was not only knowledgeable but also calm under pressure, a combination he hadn't expected. He stepped back slightly, no longer making jokes or trying to impress his friends. The atmosphere in the store had changed. What had begun as mockery was now a lesson in humility for the young men. Evelyn continued browsing, picking up different firearms and handling them with care. Each movement was precise, deliberate, and confident, reinforcing her message without a single harsh word. She examined the weight of the guns, checked the triggers, and considered the balance of each piece. The young men, who had assumed she was frail or inexperienced, were forced to watch as she demonstrated skill and knowledge they hadn't anticipated. Their earlier laughter had disappeared entirely, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement that they had misjudged her. Other customers in the store began to notice the tension and the quiet confrontation. Some watched with curiosity, others with admiration. Evelyn's calm confidence was magnetic. It drew attention without effort. She had become the center of the room not because she sought to dominate, but because she refused to be diminished. Her dignity and authority were evident to everyone, and even those who didn't know her could see that she was someone not to be underestimated. Evelyn's mind remained focused on her purpose. She didn't allow herself to be distracted by the mockery or the uneasy energy from the group. Instead, she used the moment as an opportunity to assert her independence and knowledge. She wanted to show not just to them, but to anyone watching, that experience and competence cannot be measured by age or appearance. Her actions were deliberate, her confidence unwavering, and her calm authority undeniable. By now, it was obvious that the young men were no longer in control of the situation. Their attempts at ridicule had failed. Evelyn had turned their mockery into a silent demonstration of skill, patience, and dignity. She had handled the situation without anger, without shouting, and without losing her composure. She had shown that respect is earned through presence, knowledge, and confidence, not through loud words or bravado. As she moved toward the counter to ask for assistance, the young men exchanged uneasy glances. They were realizing that their assumptions had been completely wrong. Evelyn had not only proven that she could handle herself, but had also quietly commanded the respect of everyone in the store. She had turned what could have been an embarrassing or intimidating encounter into a display of strength, patience, and dignity. Evelyn's quiet assertion of authority set the stage for what was about to happen next. The story was far from over. The young men had been humbled, but the arrival of someone with real authority, the CEO, was about to change the dynamics completely. Evelyn had already taken control with her own knowledge and presence, and soon, she would witness respect being enforced in a way that no one in the store would forget. Just as the tension in the store reached its peak, the door at the front jingled softly, and a figure stepped inside. It was Mr. Jonathan Hayes, the CEO of the gun store, a man known for his presence, authority, and fairness. He moved with confidence, immediately noticing the small group of young men hovering near Evelyn and the uneasy atmosphere that had settled over the store. Mr. Hayes had a way of commanding attention without raising his voice. Just his presence could make people stop and listen. He observed quietly for a moment, taking in the situation. He noticed Evelyn, calm and composed, standing with quiet dignity while the young men mocked her openly. Their body language was defensive, unsure, and slightly aggressive. Mr. Hayes could see that Evelyn was handling herself well, but he also knew that some authority was needed to restore proper respect in the store. The CEO approached with measured steps, each one purposeful, signaling that he was someone not to be ignored. Evelyn, noticing the man approaching, did not flinch. She remained composed, aware that this was someone who could change the dynamics of the situation entirely. The young men, however, were immediately intimidated. They had been trying to assert dominance over Evelyn, thinking her age made her vulnerable. But now, a figure of authority had entered the room, and their confidence began to waver. The shift in energy was palpable. What had been mockery was about to meet firm correction. Mr. Hayes stopped a few feet away from the group and looked at the young men directly. His gaze was calm but unmistakably authoritative. "Gentlemen," he said in a measured tone, "I don't know what you think is happening here, but this is a place of respect. Everyone in this store deserves courtesy, regardless of age or experience." His words were simple, yet the weight behind them silenced the group instantly. The store, once filled with quiet tension and uncomfortable whispers, fell into stillness. Evelyn felt a sense of relief, but she didn't relax her posture. She knew that the CEO's intervention would change the atmosphere dramatically, but she also knew that she had already set the stage with her own confidence and composure. Mr. Hayes then turned toward her, and his expression softened into one of respect. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Evelyn with a tone that was both courteous and sincere, "thank you for visiting our store. Let me know if you need any assistance." The single word, "ma'am," carried dignity and recognition, immediately showing the young men that Evelyn was not only respected but valued. The young men, who had moments ago been laughing and mocking, now looked awkward and ashamed. Their smirks disappeared, replaced by nervous glances at each other. They realized that their behavior had been inappropriate, and they had been caught in front of someone who would not tolerate disrespect. For the first time, they understood that mocking someone's age, especially in a place where knowledge and responsibility mattered, was not acceptable. Mr. Hayes continued, speaking directly to them but without anger. "This is a store where experience, knowledge, and safety matter. We do not tolerate disrespect or mockery. I suggest you learn to treat others with courtesy and understanding." His voice was calm but firm, carrying the authority of someone used to managing people and enforcing rules. Every word he spoke reinforced the lesson Evelyn had quietly begun on her own. Respect is earned and expected, and assumptions based on age or appearance are often wrong. Evelyn watched the exchange silently, appreciating the CEO's intervention, but knowing that her own actions had prepared the ground for this moment. She had remained calm, confident, and knowledgeable, and now Mr. Hayes' arrival magnified her presence. The young men were no longer able to hide behind jokes or laughter. The authority in the room had shifted entirely. The clerk, who had been unsure earlier, now stood quietly, watching the situation resolve itself. Mr. Hayes' firm but fair handling left no room for further mockery. Evelyn approached the counter to finalize her purchase, and the CEO personally assisted her, offering advice on models and safety features. The young men were forced to step aside, their earlier arrogance replaced by humility. The shift was complete. Respect had been restored, and it was clear to everyone that Evelyn's age was not a weakness but simply one part of her story. As Evelyn selected the firearm she wanted and prepared to check out, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The day had started with whispers and laughter, with assumptions made about her age and capability. Now, with her calm authority and the CEO's intervention, she had turned what could have been an embarrassing or intimidating experience into a moment of respect and recognition. The young men, humbled by the encounter, would likely remember this lesson for a long time. The store returned to its normal rhythm, the tension easing but leaving behind a lingering sense of admiration for Evelyn. She had faced mockery and disrespect without losing her composure, demonstrating that confidence and knowledge speak louder than words. Mr. Hayes' presence reinforced this, showing that respect is a principle that must be upheld, especially in a place dedicated to responsibility and safety. By the time Evelyn left the store, she had not only purchased her firearm, but had also earned the silent acknowledgement of everyone present. The encounter was more than just a shopping trip. It was a demonstration of dignity, composure, and the power of quiet authority combined with the support of true leadership. Everyone in the store had learned something important. Never underestimate someone based on age, and always show respect to those who command it through their actions and presence. After the CEO, Mr. Jonathan Hayes, stepped in, the energy in the store shifted completely. The young men, who had been laughing and mocking Evelyn just moments before, were now frozen in place. They hadn't expected such a strong, calm presence to intervene, and the effect was immediate. Silence filled the room, punctuated only by the faint jingling of the door as other customers moved about. Evelyn, standing tall and composed, felt a quiet satisfaction. She had remained dignified and unshaken throughout the ridicule, and now authority had come to her aid to enforce respect. Mr. Hayes didn't raise his voice, nor did he need to. His calm, deliberate tone carried more weight than any shouting could. "This store is built on respect," he said firmly, scanning the room so everyone could feel the seriousness of his words. "We do not tolerate belittling or mocking anyone, regardless of age, experience, or background. Everyone here deserves to be treated with courtesy." He paused, letting his words sink in. The young men shifted uncomfortably, realizing that their behavior had crossed a line they hadn't fully understood until now. Turning to Evelyn, Mr. Hayes addressed her with a level of courtesy that immediately reinforced the lesson. "Ma'am," he said, emphasizing respect and recognition in a single word. "Thank you for visiting us today. If you need any assistance, I'm here to help." The simplicity of the word, "ma'am," spoken with genuine respect, carried an authority that was impossible to ignore. It validated Evelyn's experience and presence in the store, and highlighted the stark contrast between how she was treated by the young men and how a respectful adult should behave. The young men looked at each other in awkward silence. Their earlier smugness had vanished, replaced by embarrassment and confusion. They had assumed superiority based on Evelyn's age, thinking they could dominate her with mockery and jokes. But the CEO's intervention had shown them otherwise. They were no longer in control of the situation, and it was clear that their behavior had consequences. Mr. Hayes continued, addressing the young men directly but without anger. His voice was calm, authoritative, and measured. "If you cannot treat customers with respect, you are not welcome here. This is a place of responsibility, learning, and safety. Humility and courtesy are not optional. They are expected." The words were simple but powerful. Each sentence carried weight, leaving no room for excuses or arrogance. Evelyn noticed that even the clerk, who had been distracted and uncertain earlier, now stood silently, watching as authority and dignity reshaped the environment. Evelyn herself remained calm but attentive. She didn't need the CEO to defend her. Her own confidence and knowledge had already commanded respect. What Mr. Hayes' intervention did was amplify the message for everyone present. Evelyn had quietly shown that she was capable, and now the CEO had made it clear that mockery would not be tolerated. The combination of her composure and his authority created an undeniable lesson. Disrespect, especially towards someone who has demonstrated knowledge and skill, has no place here. The young men, still standing near the display case, began to realize the weight of their actions. Their previous attempts to belittle Evelyn now seemed childish and petty. They had underestimated her, and they had also underestimated the environment she had entered. A place that valued knowledge, responsibility, and respect above all else. They shifted from foot to foot, glanced at each other nervously, and lowered their heads slightly, a silent acknowledgement that they had been wrong. Other customers in the store noticed the dynamic shift as well. Whispers of admiration spread quietly among them, and some watched Evelyn with a sense of awe. She had faced mockery without losing composure, and now, with Mr. Hayes' intervention, she was being recognized for her dignity and experience. The moment had transformed from a potentially humiliating encounter into a demonstration of quiet strength, authority, and respect for all to see. Mr. Hayes then personally assisted Evelyn, walking her through the firearms she had been interested in. He offered advice and answered her questions with patience, taking the time to ensure she felt supported and valued. Every action was deliberate, showing that respect was not just spoken, it was practiced. Evelyn felt a sense of quiet pride. She had come into the store with a purpose, faced mockery with patience and confidence, and now received the validation she deserved. Meanwhile, the young men were left to reflect on their behavior. Their arrogance had been met with calm authority, their mockery had been neutralized, and they had witnessed the power of respect and dignity firsthand. They understood that actions, composure, and knowledge speak louder than jokes and condescension. The lesson had been delivered not with humiliation, but with clarity, fairness, and authority. As Evelyn completed her purchase, she noticed that the young men had moved quietly to the other side of the store, giving her space. The clerk, who had been part of the earlier disrespect, had also withdrawn, now clearly aware of the impact of behavior and respect. Evelyn had turned what could have been a tense, uncomfortable situation into a moment of quiet triumph. By the time she left the store, Evelyn had achieved more than just buying a firearm. She had demonstrated the power of composure, patience, and knowledge. The CEO's intervention had reinforced the importance of respect and authority, making it clear to everyone present that dignity must be upheld, regardless of age or experience. The young men had learned a lesson in humility, and the store had returned to its normal rhythm, but with a lingering awareness that respect is earned and expected, not assumed. Evelyn walked out of the store quietly, her head held high, her purchase in hand, and a quiet satisfaction in her heart. She had faced mockery and emerged stronger, supported by her own confidence and the intervention of a leader who understood the importance of respect. The day had begun with whispers and laughter, but ended as a powerful demonstration of dignity, authority, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing one's own worth. After the CEO's firm yet calm intervention, the store settled into a quieter rhythm, but the atmosphere remained charged with the lesson that had just been delivered. Evelyn, standing near the counter, handled her transaction with steady hands and a composed expression. She was no longer the target of ridicule, and the young men, once loud and mocking, now hovered awkwardly nearby, unsure of what to do next. They had learned, perhaps for the first time in a real way, that underestimating someone based on age or appearance was a mistake. The young men exchanged nervous glances, their earlier arrogance completely gone. The confident smirks that had accompanied their mockery were replaced by embarrassment and unease. They realized that their behavior had been immature, disrespectful, and inappropriate. Each glance at Evelyn reminded them that she had handled the situation with calm authority, skill, and dignity. They hadn't just encountered an elderly woman buying a firearm. They had faced someone who knew exactly what she was doing and refused to be intimidated. Evelyn moved to finalize her purchase, her actions precise and deliberate. She handled the paperwork, checked the firearm thoroughly, and asked questions with intelligence and poise. Every step she took reinforced her competence and experience. The CEO, Mr. Hayes, assisted her personally, providing advice and guidance with respect and attentiveness. His presence underscored the importance of her dignity and authority, showing the young men that true respect is not only recognized but also actively enforced by those in leadership positions. The young men began to shift from side to side, a clear sign of their discomfort. They were learning, perhaps reluctantly, that confidence built on mockery and assumptions was meaningless when confronted with real knowledge and calm authority. Evelyn didn't need to say anything else. Her quiet composure spoke volumes. Every movement, every decision she made, conveyed that she was in control, not just of the situation but of her own life and actions. Other customers in the store began to take notice. They observed Evelyn's quiet strength and Mr. Hayes' firm support, understanding the importance of respect and dignity in everyday interactions. The young men, who had been trying to assert dominance through ridicule, were now fully aware that their behavior was wrong. They had not only embarrassed themselves but had also learned an important lesson about humility, respect, and the power of composure. Evelyn completed her purchase, carefully packing the firearm and ensuring that she understood all safety procedures. She thanked Mr. Hayes for his assistance, her voice polite and sincere. "Thank you for your help," she said. "I appreciate the guidance." Her tone was calm, yet it carried the weight of experience and confidence. Mr. Hayes responded with equal respect, reinforcing the lesson that proper behavior and courtesy are always acknowledged and valued. The young men, watching silently, seemed to shrink in comparison to the quiet authority of Evelyn and the CEO. Their earlier attempts at mockery had failed, and now they were left with only the realization of their own mistake. The store had become a classroom of sorts, teaching them that respect is not optional, that experience and knowledge matter, and that mocking others for superficial reasons, such as age, is not only rude but also embarrassing when faced with true competence. As Evelyn prepared to leave, the young men stepped aside, giving her space. The clerk, who had previously contributed to the teasing, now watched quietly, likely reflecting on how easily a situation could shift when authority and dignity were applied. Evelyn walked confidently toward the door, carrying her purchase, her head held high, and a quiet sense of pride in her actions. She had handled a difficult situation with composure and intelligence, and in doing so had earned not just the respect of the CEO and other customers, but also the silent acknowledgement of those who had mocked her. The lesson for the young men was clear. Respect is earned, not demanded. Confidence and skill are more powerful than laughter or ridicule. And perhaps most importantly, assumptions based on age or appearance are often wrong and can lead to embarrassment and regret. They had seen firsthand how quiet composure and knowledge could turn a potentially humiliating situation into a display of dignity and authority. Evelyn's day at the gun store had transformed from a simple shopping trip into a powerful demonstration of strength, patience, and respect. She had faced mockery, handled it with grace, and emerged victorious without needing to raise her voice or act aggressively. The CEO's intervention had amplified her message, ensuring that respect was recognized and enforced, leaving everyone in the store with a lasting impression of dignity and authority. By the time Evelyn stepped out of the store, she had completed more than just a purchase. She had reminded everyone present, including herself, of the importance of patience, knowledge, and self-respect. The young men had learned a lesson in humility and courtesy that would likely stay with them for a long time. Evelyn's quiet confidence, combined with the CEO's firm intervention, had turned a moment of potential embarrassment into a memorable and empowering experience. As she walked down the street, Evelyn felt a sense of calm triumph. She had not only asserted her independence and skill but had also witnessed the power of respect and authority in action. The experience reinforced her belief that dignity is maintained not through loud confrontation, but through quiet confidence, knowledge, and the support of those who understand and uphold respect. It was a day she would remember, not for the mockery she endured, but for the strength, recognition, and respect she earned. Evelyn had finally completed her purchase, her firearm carefully packed and her paperwork signed. But as she stood near the door, preparing to leave, she felt a quiet satisfaction that went far beyond the transaction itself. The day had begun with whispered jokes, sneers, and blatant mockery, yet she was leaving with her dignity fully intact, her confidence unshaken, and most importantly, the respect she deserved. The store, once filled with tension and subtle derision, had now transformed into a place where authority, respect, and experience were clearly recognized and valued. The young men who had mocked her were still present, though their earlier bravado had disappeared entirely. They had witnessed something they had never anticipated. A woman in her late 70s, calm, knowledgeable, and confident, handling firearms with precision and asserting her presence without aggression. They had also seen the CEO, Mr. Hayes, intervene with authority and fairness, reinforcing the lesson that respect is not optional. The combination of Evelyn's quiet strength and the CEO's firm but courteous handling of the situation had left them humbled, a mix of embarrassment and newfound understanding settling over them. As Evelyn walked toward the door, she noticed the way their posture had changed. Shoulders slumped slightly, heads lowered, and whispers replaced their earlier laughter. They were no longer a group of mocking bystanders. They were witnesses to a demonstration of dignity and competence. Evelyn's calm authority, coupled with Mr. Hayes' intervention, had turned a moment of ridicule into a powerful lesson in humility, respect, and the consequences of underestimating someone based on age. The other customers in the store also seemed to take notice. A few offered small, admiring smiles, perhaps inspired by Evelyn's composure or relieved that the situation had been resolved respectfully. Some may have even reflected on their own assumptions about age, strength, and capability. Evelyn, though aware of the attention, remained focused on her goal and on the quiet pride she felt within herself. She had faced mockery with patience, knowledge, and confidence, and she had emerged not just victorious in a social sense but strengthened by the experience. Mr. Hayes walked with her to the door, offering a polite nod and a courteous farewell. "Thank you for visiting us, ma'am," he said once more, emphasizing the respect that had been absent at the beginning of her visit. "It's been a pleasure assisting you today." His words carried sincerity and reinforced the lesson that had unfolded over the past hour. The CEO's recognition wasn't just about courtesy. It was about reinforcing the value of dignity, knowledge, and self-respect in a setting where such traits truly mattered. The young men, still lingering near the counter, exchanged another nervous glance. The experience had clearly left a mark on them. They had learned that mockery and assumptions are easily dismantled by composure, skill, and quiet authority. Evelyn had not needed to shout or argue. She had allowed her knowledge, experience, and demeanor to speak for her. Combined with the CEO's firm handling of their behavior, the young men were confronted with the reality that respect is earned, not demanded, and that age is not a weakness but merely a number that does not measure capability. Evelyn stepped out of the store into the afternoon sunlight, a sense of calm triumph washing over her. The streets were familiar and quiet, yet she felt a renewed sense of independence and strength. Her purchase was important, yes, but it was the journey, the confrontation with mockery, the assertion of her dignity, and the restoration of respect, that defined the day. She had faced what could have been an embarrassing situation with grace and knowledge, and the outcome had been more than satisfactory. It had been empowering. As she walked, Evelyn reflected on what had happened inside the store. She realized that strength isn't always loud or aggressive. It can be quiet, composed, and unwavering. True authority comes not from intimidation but from skill, knowledge, and self-confidence. The young men had assumed superiority, believing they could belittle her simply because of her age, but they had been proven wrong. The CEO's intervention had reinforced the lesson, but Evelyn's calm determination had made it possible in the first place. Evelyn also thought about the broader impact of the day. Respect is often taken for granted, and many people underestimate others based on superficial factors such as age, appearance, or gender. Her experience demonstrated that assumptions can be dangerous and disrespectful, and that standing firm with confidence and knowledge can not only protect oneself, but also teach others a valuable lesson. The young men had learned humility, other customers had witnessed dignity, and even the store staff had been reminded of the importance of proper conduct and respect. By the time she reached her car, Evelyn felt a sense of quiet accomplishment. The firearm she purchased was not just a tool for personal safety. It symbolized her independence, preparation, and the strength to navigate situations that could have been intimidating. More importantly, the day had been a testament to her composure, patience, and ability to command respect without confrontation. She had faced mockery, stood her ground, and left the store with more than a purchase. She left with validation, recognition, and an empowering experience that reinforced her confidence and self-worth. Evelyn started the car and glanced back at the store one last time. The young men were still inside, undoubtedly reflecting on the lessons they had just learned. The store was returning to normal, but the impression of dignity, composure, and respect that Evelyn had demonstrated would remain with everyone who witnessed it. She drove off quietly, her mind calm, her spirit empowered, and her belief in the strength of patience, knowledge, and quiet authority reaffirmed. The day had begun with mockery, but it ended as a story of triumph, respect, and personal empowerment. A reminder that true strength lies not in loud words or assumptions, but in poise, preparation, and the unwavering confidence to stand one's ground.